Tell you when it's,
Oh,
you're good.
okay, we're good. Thank you. Call to order. I'd like to entertain a motion for approval of the 9/6 minutes.
Can I make one change? I think I had emailed Janet when I was speaking. It's New Franklin School, not just plain Franklin School. It's in, we have that? Thank you.
Can you repeat that for us?
It's New Franklin School.
New Franklin.
And it was just listed as Franklin School. I just wanted to get the title
okay.
right.
How it was written, I thought, okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Will.
Do we have a motion to accept the minutes with the added change from Linda?
So moved.
Need a second?
Second?
Thank you. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Thank you. So just a brief comment on a meeting that we were able to be part of. We had great representation at the council working session on September 12th. And I did a very brief, along with who was with me?
Me.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Lori. Along with Laurie, we did a bit of a presentation and the work we're doing through the task force. So it was very brief, but it was good for us to make the council aware of the work of the task force. So we're going to move right into Portsmouth Housing Authority presentation, and Craig Welch could not be with us today, but in his place, we have Kelly Lesko, who's Director of Resident Services. So, Kelly, if you would like to join us and talk to us about some of the needs that you are seeing through the Portsmouth Housing Authority.
Right over here. You know what, come to this empty chair, that'll be the best. So you can join us at the table. And Molly or Lori, would you mind just putting down Tanya's sign? Thanks. Welcome.
I'm Kelly Lesko. I'm the Resident Services Director for the Portsmouth Housing Authority. You'll have to forgive me. I wasn't really sure what the format was going to be today, so I did prepare a few notes on what we're seeing at the Housing Authority and sort of things that we are doing or would like to do. Because of COVID, a lot of our residents they just sort of retreated to their apartments. There was really no sense of community. So we're starting to partner with some organizations like the Pine Tree Institute. We're in the works to get together. It's sort of a program where they discuss adverse childhood experiences, trauma, and how that impacts our adult lives. But what they do is more of like, a workshop here and there. And what we're proposing to do is to collaborate and come up with a series of ongoing opportunities, excuse me, for residents to kind of talk about trauma. It would be a facilitated group, and so Pine Tree has the resources to do the workshops. But for this, we would need some funding to kind of do the partnership and offer the ongoing programming. We're also talking about doing some parenting coaching where it's sort of that Watch Me Grow program where you kind of talk about developmental milestone screenings. There's also a parent cafe that we are discussing. But all of that, we would require, childcare for our folks. Which kind of brings me to that community, the sense of community where we've got some high school students. I'm meeting with the outreach coordinator at Portsmouth High School, and we were thinking that maybe, some of the students could provide childcare, but it's not like a babysitting service. It would be more like a little informal mentoring so that they could maybe model better behavior for our kids and things like that. But all of these things, we need staffing. We just kind of need, money to do more detailed assessments. Like for our senior folks, you wouldn't think of it, but COVID actually impacted like their mobility. And so we're seeing a lot of our older residents with an increased fall risk. So there are assessments that we are able to do and kind of give the resident that information so that they can then go to their healthcare provider and, kind of combat things like that. So there are so many different areas that COVID really sort of affected housing and our seniors with the isolation. And really, we're just kind of looking for the resources to, get more staffing to help us implement the programming, we've seen a real increase in substance misuse and mental health. All of that was exacerbated by COVID. And so my hope is to really kind of bring back and foster a sense of community amongst our properties and like between residents and neighbors, kind of like a neighbor helping neighbor sort of program. Looking for scholarships for some of our kids to attend. I mean, Portsmouth has awesome summer programs and after-school programs. So, but they're not always attainable for our kids. So, just things like that is really kind of what we're looking for and looking at doing. I know Craig had talked about some more like air quality type of things, which are super important for us as well. But we as resident services, I mean, I would like to see gardens built at Wamisit. We have so many residents who love to get outside, and we had these big REAC inspections where we had to really cut back a lot of the vegetation outside, and people had to kind of get rid of their gardens. And so many of them had said, like, this is my therapy, like this is for my mental health. So we'd like to offer. There are spaces. There are at least 3 different areas at Wamisit that really could use the gardening space. At Gosling, our resident service coordinator over there, she has an amazing garden that she worked with the kids. Anybody with a green thumb, you'd be jealous. I mean, it's beautiful. So I would love to be able to do something like that at our other sites and, get folks outside, get them working together. And yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now.
If I can add to that, for the benefit of the group, Kelly touched upon some of the more structural elements that impact physical plant within the Housing Authority, and those would be on the second page of the handout that is in front of you, with this as the cover. So this represents the list of projects we knew about when we brought it to the council, and page 2 is what Craig provided on behalf of the PHA. But Kelly, question for you. Would you say that number 1, resident services, is much of what you talked about here today incorporated into that first request for the $510,000, or maybe part of it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. And then I think we get into more structural elements with priority number 3. I like it. The priorities are not in the order they're listed. So now this is an eye test for me. Some of them are real nuts and bolts type stuff as well. Things that we're doing on the city side that they would be responsible for at PHA properties.
Can I ask just, sorry. Just a clarifying question then. All of the requests and ideas for use of funding that you just described is what is actually contained in this 1.355?
I don't know. That was a question I had for Kelly.
Okay, so we're asking.
I don't know how much of what she talked about is in that 510 or the 150 under Gosling and Wamisit. It would be great to have the gardening aspect included in a specific mention of Wamisit. But it's not fair to put Kelly on the spot either.
I know you might not know the answer to that question. I'm just trying to figure out if there's an additional request for funding from this task force, or if you're providing like supportive information about the programs that are listed here.
I believe it's more supportive information. Yes.
Perfect, thank you.
And so, Kelly, we do have a parenting program. So do you want my card? Because we do parenting programs throughout both
Yeah,
Rockingham and Stratford
absolutely.
County. Okay.
Yep, that would
If I have
be great.
20-year-olds, is it too late for me?
question, it wasn't mentioned here when you were talking, but how does transportation affect the residents?
Transportation,
thereof.
yeah, it's always a challenge. You know, we did an event actually on Saturday, and myself and another coordinator were kind of driving the PHA van to get folks to where they needed to go. It's more, I think, for the kids to be able to access some of the after-school programming or summer programming. That's where we find there's a big need for transportation, because, you know, mom or dad might be able to get them there, but they can't necessarily get them home, or, you know, it's just either they don't have their own transportation, or, you know, sometimes, unfortunately, like they're not up to even get the kids to where they need to go, or it's just it's always a hurdle for us.
I just want to share, just listening to this, I'm sort of in awe, because I've spoken with a number of people who live in places that you're mentioning, as well as senior citizens, and all of these things were mentioned. One way or the other, they mentioned it. And one other thing I would add is that the seniors mentioned, like in senior housing, they used to have, those who have been there for quite a while, they used to have special programs for them.
Yes.
And they wonder if that could ever happen again. It could be workshops, discussion groups, people giving presentations, or even someone said, even someone coming to play a little music once in a while, or something.
Right.
So you covered, like, this is what everyone was speaking about.
Yeah, so we're actually gearing up to do a resident needs assessment in October. I'm hoping is when it will go out for, you know, our planning purposes for next year. We would like to kind of see, you know, what would be meaningful, most meaningful to our residents. We are starting to slowly get activities and workshops back, but even now, like, a lot of our residents are still very hesitant. You know, now they're all concerned about when they're going to get their boosters, and, you know, we're trying to arrange for them to get boosters and things like that. So, you know, you hate to blame everything on COVID, but it really has been difficult to get programs up and running again. But we are starting up again with coffee hours, and we've got our after-school program. I've got a Medicare program coming in October to kind of help folks out with that. So we're hoping, my hope is to build that all back up, and you know, get us back in better book than we were before.
And one other thing, I just made myself a note, because
Pardon me,
several people
Nancy?
mentioned that
Nancy,
article.
you need to pull the microphone right here. Right, you are the softest speaker.
They mentioned that several of them have read this article recently. It said the scientists, experts predicted that COVID will linger. Some of you might have seen that article in the Portsmouth Herald, even though, you know, right now, the Center for Disease Control and all, that's my background in health and all that, and is saying that there's many positive changes that are taking place. On the other hand, there's a number of scientists that said this may linger, and then they list all the reasons why. You know, I mean, I worked at the polls this past week, and there were people coughing, and other people got nervous and stuff, and people started putting their masks on. And then the day afterwards, we got a call that one of the workers was diagnosed positive, had the COVID. So we all had to be tested and stuff. And as far as I know, so far no one else has gotten it, and neither have I.
Can I ask a question, Kelly? In terms of the number of children in PHA, do you have a sense of numbers and you know, in terms of the breakdown from between ages and so on?
No, not off the top of my head. I don't. I'm sorry. But, you know, a lot of the programming right now is geared toward, like, school age, but I would say almost like elementary, middle school age. We're really looking to capture maybe, like, early, you know, younger kids, as well as some of the high school kids, and to try to get more programming for them.
And
as
in
well.
terms of the trauma, I mean, has there been an assessment of trauma in those the younger kids?
So what we see, it's mostly, you know, it's coming from the parents. The parents have experienced those traumas, and it kind of trickles down into the parenting of their kids. So, yeah, you do see little behavioral things, and, you know, I'm certainly not an expert by any means, but just in the trainings that I've had and what we witness with our residents, I mean, you can see there's either a disconnect or, you know, maybe the parenting style isn't what it should be. So we're looking to reach out to those parents and say, hey, like, you know, yes, this may have happened to you, but you can change this, and, you know, you can parent your child differently to make them more resilient and, you know, kind of just break this pattern. So that's what we're looking to do with Pine Tree Institute.
So Kelly, do you have, is the Greenleaf Rec Center part of that, the
Yes.
programming still, and that's kind of like back and up and running and?
Yes, yep.
Okay.
So Tammy Jocelyn has the after-school program running.
Okay.
Yep, so that's back. They had a really successful summer. They
Great.
did their summer program. So, yeah, and then.
And that's open to individuals living in Wamasett?
Yes.
Yep,
Yep,
okay.
and then I
School
believe
age.
the Gosling kids go to the MC3 program.
Okay,
in the
right, because they're at New
summertime.
Franklin, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Karen, I had a question for you. The request from Portsmouth Housing Authority, on that second page, is that outside of this process? Is that part of the request of the $12 million, or is that?
This is a request as of the September 12th work session, so none of the items on the PHA list presented here have been funded.
Okay.
They were, for this exercise, I considered them a department of the city, just the way we pulled all the other departments, and I want to make sure we included their asks. So assume that none of these have been met.
Other questions for Kelly? Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you.
So next we have there's Brad Nichols from Coast Bus.
Kelly, yes.
Thanks, Kelly.
And as Kelly mentioned about mobility and COVID, boy, do I get that. I went from not having a cane to a cane. So I'm Rad Nichols. I'm with Coast. I'm our executive director. We do not have a request in, but Janet had asked if I could come and speak because I understand you've had a lot of conversations around transportation. And transportation is a very common theme across the seacoast, and the need for more transportation, and particularly public transportation and community-based transportation, whether that be for the general public or for special populations, elderly, individuals with disabilities, low income, what have you. As an organization, Coast was significantly hindered in terms of our operation and the impacts on our operation as a result of COVID and the pandemic. We did actually shut down for a month-and-a-half period in April and part of May of 2020. We slowly ramped back up, and then completely we launched in a very soft launch of a completely redesigned fixed route system that we'd spent the previous 2 years planning. So a lot of folks disappeared off our system and have slowly been coming back, but they don't recognize the system that they're coming back to because it is very different than it was. The other thing that's been happening over the last 5+ years is there is a real shortage of commercially licensed vehicle operators who can operate our larger buses, which is what you see primarily on our fixed routes. Sometimes now you'll see a smaller bus, and that's a direct result of not having enough commercially licensed staff, and so we put a smaller bus on on a route that has fewer riders and we can manage with that smaller vehicle. So what you've seen over the past couple of years is Coast actually slowly diminishing the level of services we can provide because of a lack of staff. And that's something we've really struggled with. I'll say at the same time, our pay rates have increased somewhere between 20 and 25% for those staff over the last 3 years. We'll probably, in our upcoming budget that we're looking to pass at the end of the month, there's the likelihood of another notable increase in pay to hopefully become more competitive in that marketplace. But it is a very serious challenge that we're facing. And it affects all parts of our operation, whether it's fixed route or demand response, like our ADA paratransit services or our Portsmouth Senior Transportation and some of the other services we provide. But we are an organization that is not afraid of thinking outside of the box. And so we are open to concepts on how we could better serve the city. The one thing that I will say, reading some of the articles that have come out about using these funds, traditionally we're talking about ongoing programs, and I think it seems like some of the focus has been on not getting into ongoing programs and rather being more focused on one-time opportunities. We don't tend to be that. I will say we also have been a direct recipient of somewhere between $7 and $8 million of COVID relief funds directly. So whether that's through the CARES Act or through ARPA. So, and we are spending that down aggressively, and we'll use that funding through our fiscal year 24, which will end in October, or end of September 2024. But we did, we did just suffer through a major wave of COVID at our offices. At the end of October, we had half of our operating staff out at one point, and we continue to see staff affected on a day-to-day basis. I think we've had 3 people go down this week with COVID. So it's an ongoing issue that we are constantly having to manage. So I don't have a request. I don't have anything in specifics, but we are certainly willing to be at the table and discuss opportunities if there are opportunities that you'd like to bring to our attention.
Questions of the task force?
Back when you said that during COVID it was really hard for Coast, and you listed as one thing the lack of drivers. What are the other factors that made Coast have difficulty during COVID? Just not enough riders, or so it's not cost effective? What are the factors?
So our ridership dropped significantly. We were probably somewhere around 40% of what we had traditionally been carrying on a monthly basis. We're back up to between 60 and 65%, but I'll be honest with you, it's sort of stuck there, and it's stuck there for a reason. It's because we keep not being able to run our full set of services. If we were able to do that, what we're seeing right now is our average weekday ridership is climbing. So we know that there's demand there. We can't fix the supply issue.
So what percentage of your routes have been either declined or stopped, so comparing pre-COVID to now, is it
40%.
40% of your routes
That's
have either been stopped or in some way impacted?
suspended, temporarily suspended. It's getting beyond temporary at this point.
I have a question about your planning, because you mentioned shortly after the pandemic and trying to right the ship, you made a big change to your fixed route. And you mentioned that it took 2 years to plan. Is that typical for length of planning? I want to give these folks a sense of what a planning effort looks like, because we threw you a curveball. You'll remember when we said, hey, could you change your route to accommodate when families first moved?
Yep.
And maybe use that as an example, because if we, maybe what I'm trying to say is managing expectations here. Should we or should we not be thinking about an ask of you, and then we should calculate what that means and a time horizon? I threw a lot at you, so.
It depends on the type of service or the services you're talking about. If it involves buying equipment, for example, it's a 2-year wait to get a
vehicle.
vehicle.
Sure.
Smaller vehicles, it might be 9 to 12 months, but that is highly variable. In terms of planning changes, that 2-year process that we went through, we did a comprehensive operations analysis. It's the first one we'd ever done as the organization in our, 28 or whatever it was, 38-year history at the time. And we relooked the whole system and really went out. I think we had 4 different public hearing opportunities or public information gathering sessions, periods across the service area.
Sure.
So from Farmington down to here. It was a much longer process than we normally would go through, but any of these changes take months. It really depends on what exactly we're talking about. If it's something that sort of expands the eligibility for, say, demand response service in the city, sort of to piggyback on what we're doing with senior transportation, that might take a lot less time.
Okay.
The question is, are we going to have the staff to support that?
Got it.
If I'm being brutally honest.
Question. Where are our commercial drivers trained? Do they get training through the Coast Bus company, or where does that happen?
So, no. Traditionally, we do not train people for their commercial driver's license.
Okay.
There are a lot of reasons for that. It's very expensive. It's very time consuming. Your insurance company really doesn't like it and will charge you much higher rates for that.
Right.
Within the last year, the federal government has totally changed the licensing process and a lot of the rules around that. There is a single commercial driving school in the state of New Hampshire currently operating. There are some in northern Mass or in Maine. So we've tried to work with some of the state programs to see if we could get folks who are not currently working interested in taking that training and coming to work at Coast. We've not had any success with that, unfortunately. We tried working with the community college system to see if they could begin programs to help with that. We haven't had any luck there. One of the things that happened with the pandemic was most of your commercial driving schools were shut down or restricted, and so you've got a nationwide backup of need to the tune of some 80,000 commercially licensed folks. So, and you can make a whole lot more driving packages than you can people. And guess what also happened during the pandemic? We started moving a lot more packages door to door than we used to.
Right.
So we compete with all the home delivery service drivers that are out there.
Who are probably more competitive with the pay.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Now, probably burn you out in a year or two, though.
Yeah.
where we can give you a much more realistic day-to-day work schedule that it gets you home every day and doesn't leave you exhausted at the end of every week.
Gotcha.
So, budgetarily, do you, you're able to meet your needs? And the reason I'm asking that question is because if we are, transportation did rise to the top of a priority list that we're discussing, and so if there is a need, where you talked workforce, and that's a long-term kind of issue that has to be addressed in many different areas. And I would, if you have not talked to Cheryl, the new president at Great Bay Community College, and you'd be interested, I can make that connection for you. So that's, she is interested in reaching out to the community. I don't know if you've had a conversation with her yet,
Not
but
with Cheryl, no.
She's relatively new. Yeah.
she's relatively new, and
Yeah.
but she is very interested in having these kinds of conversations.
I know that has been evolving a little bit with the community college system, so
Yeah.
there may be new opportunities there.
Yeah, but getting back to the budget, are you able to meet all of your your infrastructure needs outside of being able to hire staff and so forth?
The answer to that question today is yes.
2024, you said.
When all of that emergency funding runs out in 2024, no. We go from an annual gain to an annual loss, and that annual loss in 2025 looks like about $1.2 million right now. So, no, we have a very different situation in a couple of years, and quite honestly, we're hoping that the state can become a much larger financial partner for public transit providers across the state, because we all face the same situation. And
Related-
The state currently is not much of a financial partner.
Where's the funding come from overall? It's federal funding?
We get grants directly from the Federal Transit Administration, and then our communities are our second largest source.
How many sibling organizations are like you in New Hampshire?
There's, I think, 8 or 9 of us.
Got it. And I'm sorry, one follow-up question. Are you all having similar experiences?
Yes, we are all having similar experiences.
Do you have experience in sort of managing people that might be interested in volunteering to drive people one-on-one with a stipend?
So we have, so we do not directly, but we have a program, overarching program called the Alliance for Community Transportation. And through that, we helped form Ready Rides, which is a regional volunteer driver program in sort of interior Stratford County, parts of Rockingham County. We also certainly have a relationship with Task, and there are opportunities there. I think one of the biggest challenges for volunteer driver programs right now is through the pandemic, they lost a large number of their drivers who tend to be older and tended to be a little bit nervous about driving folks. And
Is there any pot of money that has recruitment?
there is a pot of money for recruitment that is being spent currently across the state through, I think it's AHA. And so if you're on Facebook, you probably see ads for that. There's been some advertising on MUR, I believe, and through other channels. Jeff Donald on our staff, who's the regional mobility manager for ACT in this part of the state, is heavily involved in that.
Yeah. And is that something that you think we should look at expanding or adding?
I think volunteer driver programs can be a real tremendous asset. We tend to for whatever reason, we've tended to not have as much interest in that in the cities in the region versus the smaller towns. I have some theories behind that, but it's just the way it's shaken out.
Yep. Okay, thanks.
Red, when you said that you guys are funded through 2024, that's with a reduced 40
No.
routes eliminated, or
No.
that's with?
We hope with the budget that we approve at the end of the month, we'll be able to get back to almost all the way back to full staffing
Okay.
by March of next year. So that's except for maybe one route. So we hope that we'll be back to probably somewhere around 95% of our system schedules by March of next year.
Other questions? Thank you, Rad. Really appreciate you coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Rad.
I'm happy to follow up in any way if you'd like.
Super, thank you.
Okay, before we move into the next section, which is just to continue our conversation about addressing the priority areas that we have talked about in the past, in addition to the submission from Portsmouth Housing Authority, I want to bring your attention to that third page, and that is a list of applications that was submitted to the Department of Health. Is it Department of Health or Health Department? Health Department, right?
Yes, the city's health department.
City's Health Department, prior to the creation of the task force. And so the concern for certainly for me is how to address this. I mean, this was already in process, and we either need to subsume it under this process, or we need to figure out a different way to address this. And certainly, so I'd like to hear from the committee members as to your thoughts on it. We need to. I think we have an obligation to respond to these applicants, so that they know either that this is not going forward, or that it's going to be subsumed under this process, or there'll be some other process set up for consideration of these applications. And there are at least 3 committee members that represent organizations on this list.
Let me give a little color commentary. This list was established by Kim McNamara probably in the March or April timeframe, when she was soliciting ideas. And so
You're saying last March and April?
March of this year.
Oh, this, okay.
Yeah. So this is a running list of things that she was compiling. It is by no means exhaustive. And when we were asked to present to the City Council what we knew to be asks, we made sure we included these. But you'll see that the list includes names for which some dollar amounts are not available. And I think that was Kim's thought, that she had heard from folks, but the need had not been fully baked or fully articulated. So by no means is this an exhaustive list. I wanted to just make that clear. This was, I think of this as a point in time when Kim was collecting information. We're still in information gathering mode. And so, to Will's point, the group, I think, could be charged with refining this list and narrowing it down, prioritizing it perhaps, or making priority-type recommendations that both speak to individual needs as well as collectively identified group needs.
Any thoughts?
Well, I just wonder if we could have, and I mean, I guess some of them might be more like placeholders, like we want to make sure that some of these organizations, like the TBDs, but I'm just curious about some of them that actually have dollar amounts, like what the actual programming is. So like Seacoast Mental Health. So I guess if we knew more of the exact idea, then we would know that we don't want to replicate that idea, or we want to consider that idea, but I don't know what the idea is. If we could get like more specifics, maybe.
I can tell you on my end for Chase Home, because I put dollar amounts.
And you
too.
do have plan right there.
Yeah.
We can read. So I just wonder if we could get that line item idea kind of more for the other ones so that we're not trying to replicate things, like Families First, that's awesome. What do they need the money for, I guess? So I don't know if we reach out and ask that, or if
Well, I
it
mean, we
exists
did, we
somewhere.
filled out an app, it was actual
It's on
application.
it, so it
that
must
we
be
did.
somewhere already then.
Yeah, it's.
Kim did forward to me the application, so I have the whole list of applications, and so the question is, do we want to go through all those applications and make some determination under? I think we also need to keep in mind that we have been having conversations about trying to create a process where we are thinking of in thinking about the priorities. What are the priorities that we are going to work with, and then trying to create. Address the bigger picture if we can. Now, that doesn't mean that we could have a bifurcated process, I think, is what I'm trying to say, so that we address the bigger picture in terms of connecting all these dots and making sure that we are addressing transportation and daycare and mental health and so forth, but then maybe setting some funds aside specifically to address some of the needs of the applicants that are certainly on this list. And as Karen said, it's not these are, I'm sure that there are others out there, Crossroads. We didn't submit anything. I didn't even know that there was this process, because I believe it was an unofficial process. I think Kim was trying to collect information at the time.
And maybe, Will, if we look at the bigger, what do we want to, the bigger strategic planning things, and are there agencies in here that can do a component of that?
Yeah.
The other thing we need to explore, and I should be looking into this. I mean, Our Place is on here, and that's me. What other funding has that population gotten? Developmental, if they've gotten that separately, we need to find that out. And Our Place. Speaking of placeholders, I mean, we're not serving anyone yet. So maybe Lafayette House, or I've gotten in touch with One Sky, have not heard back from them. So there may be other organizations that could use, but Kim felt it was, important to represent the intellectually and developmentally disabled.
Which one is that under yours, Lori?
It's Our Place is the second one.
The second one.
So Karen, this is a
supportive housing and programming? Okay.
Karen, this is a question. I don't know if it's possible, but is there a way for us to get a big picture understanding of where all of the funding is? So to your point, Laurie, about making sure that we have a better understanding of all the different funding streams that address a particular issue, whether it's daycare, mental health, or substance misuse, or transportation, because I certainly don't have. I'm sure that there are just a lot of funding streams, particularly because of COVID, that different organizations are benefiting from, and I almost feel like we have to have some understanding of that before we can make some of these decisions.
And that would be tough for the city to try and identify, but it's certainly worth pursuing if we could sort of audit all the people who are interested in funding from us. Have they gotten other funding? Is their ask of the March-April timeframe still the same? Is it changed?
So at least getting back to those folks that submitted applications.
Can I put an idea out there? Before we get caught up in the weeds of these specific asks, some that have dollars associated, some that don't have dollars associated, many which are not represented on this list at all. Can we talk about how, as a committee, we're thinking we are going to approach the process of meeting the objectives of our mission? So I don't know that personally, I don't feel comfortable making a decision about how much a specific organization should receive or not. being in the nonprofit sector for as long as I have been, I feel like I'm never going to know what an organization needs. I think it's a really wise idea that there be some sort of process to gather this information, and that an organization would need to disclose if they've received other funding. But whether or not that impacts the decision of this committee to put forth to the city council ultimately to make the decision, we're not making the decision. I'm wondering if we can think about what that might look like. So would it be like an open call, and we invite organizations that are in the priority areas that we have identified to put forth what their project would be, what their funding request would be. If they've received other funding, it comes to this committee, and then maybe we break up in priority areas, and we can identify where there might be some collaborative opportunities. And then we just sort of make a big list of recommendations based on priorities and provide that to the council. And that way we don't have to get so stuck on like, this group asked for this amount of money, that group asked for that amount of money. Certainly circle back to these folks since they've already put in some effort to complete an application. But I feel like we're going to get stuck if we just focus too narrowly on Portsmouth Housing, this, and we still don't know what the nonprofit arts group, the details of that.
But they have their own process.
But so just like I didn't know that all of these organizations submitted a request to the public health department, we also don't, like PMAC is on here, but I imagine PMAC probably has made a request under that other bucket. So I just kind of, circling back to where I have a real concern is that there's agencies not intending to try to get more of the pie than there's to give. But when we all know how nonprofits have to do our business, right? We apply to every single opportunity that is put before us, and we just hope for the best. So I think if PMAC is submitting here and there, I'm just using them as an example, no disrespect. And then we also still have like the whole school funding thing. And we haven't, like that's not represented anywhere. So I'm just trying to think forward of how this is going to play out in the end, and how we can, based on a lot of factors and time, limit of time, maybe if we can think about that. I don't mind making any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, and
Yes.
I just want to say that also, a few meetings back, we talked about thinking outside the box, pilot programs, and looking at our needs list that we came up with and figuring out. So it's kind of like a top-down approach versus who wants money, submit your applications, then we just give them the money kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think we got to decide which way we're going to go. We're either going to, think top down, and how can we change the community?
I wouldn't use the word top down, because that has a negative connotation sometimes.
Just thinking big picture,
Big
rather
picture.
than dividing it up into little tiny pockets.
But Karen, the question is if this task force, once we make recommendations to the city council, how would they like to see those recommendations? Would they like to see us make recommendations to, like coming up with a list of nonprofits that should get a certain amount, or should it be more generic and say, okay, these are the priority areas we see as needed post-COVID, and
I feel like it's more the latter. I think it puts you in an awkward spot of naming names and choosing. And don't forget, use the framework of being a task force for good. You're not the ultimate arbiter.
Right.
The city council will be, so there's pressure off in that regard.
Yeah.
And I think they're looking for priorities and themes because they came to you all because you're the experts, and they are not, and they are relying on experts to help them make the decisions on the money. And so if it's thematic, that's great, and then as ultimate arbiters, they can decide how to divvy it up and put the city staff along with nonprofit.
Then there could be a
folks.
process, a follow-up process for organizations.
Yeah, I don't think we need to get
apply.
hung up on process, to Lori's concern. More to what is it we wish that someone addresses, someone, the ultimate arbiter of the financial decision.
Which is great, thank you.
That does take some pressure off.
It does take some pressure off, and I think it just continues to take us down the path what we started to talk about, which is those priority areas and those themes. So to get back to those to that conversation, so we heard from PHA around housing, and we heard from RAD on transportation.
And Will, I had been asked to reach out to Zach McLaughlin from the school department, and I'm meeting in with him finally at 1 o'clock after this. So I was going to hopefully invite him to our next meeting if people are still interested in to hear from him.
Yeah.
Because there is that ESSER ARPA discussion and which is what and what their needs are. So hopefully he'll be able to come next Tuesday.
I'm super curious about that, Abby. I went on the school's, the district-wide website.
Yep.
And it does look like there's been some work. I don't know, can't
Yeah.
tell when
There's been
these
some-
spreadsheets were dated, populated.
There's been a few meetings, and I was able to talk to one of the school board, Margot Peabody, she's the vice chair. Last week, we had a phone conversation just about their process, and it sounds similar to what we're trying to figure out the process of how do you submit an idea. And their decision that it's not really that the school board has to vote on it, but they do have to have had a conversation and approve it, so you can't just be kind of, sending ideas through. So she was actually reaching out to Nathan, who's the business administrator, to get back to me on what does that actually look like? How do you submit ideas? But she did have information in terms of, they sort of have a framework of percentages of where the money is going to different kind of pots.
And if I can jump in, just like the city had some public hearings on what do people want to see the money used for, the school board, I believe, has had 2 listening sessions relative to what do people want to.
And they had a survey too.
Yep,
in
and
the
a survey,
spring.
but I don't know that they've allocated anything yet formally.
Yeah, but she did just say kind of like she was telling me like last April, one of the school board meetings, they did go through like 50% is for infrastructure, 9% for loss. So, she went through learning loss was 12%, learning loss for staff, 9%. So their idea of breaking it down to where they want to put the money, but it hasn't been put yet. So that's why I think it could overlap. And as you said, Karen, it would be kind of one of the things we could come up with a great idea, and then it would kind of be out of our hands for people to say, well, that's really school, that's really ARPA. And I think we're just coming up with the ideas, which would be great.
Yeah, that would be nice if we didn't have to decide
Right.
what pot the money comes from, nor how much of that pot is dedicated where.
I think we can use we have the applications? Because
We do, and they're,
as we're gathering needs, that should be in the application. So, inviting people to speak here, this is just one more way to get information about the needs.
Well, again, I can disseminate the applications to the task force. I have them, and if you are willing to spend some time looking at those, we can.
they shouldn't be super long. I think they're
Some of the
one-pagers.
needs
I think, yeah.
out of those.
And they might be
Depends.
worth updating, too.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good idea, because I think, like Lori's point about learning a little bit more.
Yeah.
I mean, just hearing from the Public Housing
super
Authority
helpful.
and Coast today, I mean, I'm much more informed than I was, a couple
Yeah.
hours ago.
Yeah.
So I think some transparency about programs and pilots and reasons for the need would help us tremendously.
Yeah.
And it sounded like, Abby, you were familiar with what Kelly was saying about some of the projects that they have planned and where that can support some of the at-risk students. So there could be some synergy and collaboration there.
100%, because Greenleaf is something that they've always run, and then it is interesting when you think about, that there's Greenleaf and then there's MC, all these programs, but how could we kind of synthesize and get transportation, do all these things? Those are the ideas that
Right.
we could maybe support.
And so how much of it can we say like, okay, so Portsmouth Housing Authority has already put forth their request to the city. We don't have to worry about it. Like, that's off our bucket of concerns. And how much can we look at for at-risk youth that fall into that
Right.
demographic, I'm not sure I'm using the right language to really describe what I want to say, but how much can we say, okay, that initiative and that project,
Has some
good.
funding.
That's got some funding behind it. Now we can go over here and focus on mental health or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
How did these numbers get decided now? In terms
The
of how-
Portsmouth Housing Authority put that proposal forward, and they attached numbers to them. It's
Okay,
nothing
it
that's
comes
been
from them.
approved.
Okay, it's not been approved, but
Right.
they're the ones that, okay. And how about this one? I guess I'd ask,
Nancy, you got to grab the mic.
okay. I'm
and-
interested in, when we attended the city council meeting
Right.
here, the ARPA funding, has that all been, how was that all decided?
Show me the sheet you're looking at.
This one.
Yep, so this list represents the requests from departments, city departments.
City
And- And they're
department. What city
listed,
department?
they're all listed on the left
The
column.
ones that are all listed, okay.
Yep, yep.
Some say no.
Some say no because would they be eligible for capital improvement plan
Okay.
inclusion? That's a budgeting tool for us.
Okay.
So if it were up to the city could spend that money 2.5 times over. And the point was to show interest in the program and what we understand to be eligible. But that doesn't mean that they will all see the light of day or be supported by the policy decision makers who are the council.
So this still has to be,
Discussed in a
Discussed.
forum that is not
Okay.
inclusive of us. We almost don't need to worry about that, but the request came from the group earlier. What have you obligated the ARPA funds on? And that is in the presentation, page, I believe it's 5 or 6.
I
And
think the only one listed here, Karen, that could be duplicative is the marketing for local arts and cultural organizations. I don't know if that's under the Economic Development Department. It's the third one down.
Yeah, I think it probably wouldn't Venn diagram with this group. The one I think that could is number 4, health, 3 million. Kim is intent on setting aside funds to address things that come out of her needs assessment. Many of those might be items that we all would support as a
There'll be
group.
overlap,
The
yeah.
problem is timing, and so reiterating on timing, if we don't know what the needs are yet, this group could certainly ask for an extension to consider the follow-through on that.
when will these decisions be made for these?
We don't have a timetable for that. We have to obligate all of the remaining funds by December of '24 and spend them
2024?
by December of 2026.
And I don't think we really should get hung up on that, Nancy. I think we.
No, I'm just curious because it was presented to us.
Yep.
I want to know how that relates to, the,
But we have a specific task in front of us, and I
Right,
think we
right.
have a timeline, and we need to come up with the themes and the priorities based on the information we've heard and we've read about. And so, kind of just because we have less than 5 minutes, any other comments related to priorities and themes that we already have on the list? Anything else?
Can I jump ahead to next meeting speakers in addition to Dr. McLaughlin? Could be, Kim could have an update on where she is with the needs assessment. It won't be terribly long, but I think we should have her on our agenda as a standing item or maybe every other meeting to tell us how she's doing. She said she'd be available on October 4th.
Right. I also reached out to Donna Lazou, who's Donna Lee Lazou, who's the CEO for Southern New Hampshire Services, which is the CAP for Rockingham County. So I'm waiting to hear back from her, see if she can come out or send a representative to talk about kind of county-wide needs.
That's great.
We also, I invited the Seacoast Public Health Network, and they can come to the meeting on the 4th. So I will wait for confirmation on that, but we could probably put that on the agenda.
That's great.
I'm also wondering, because we have a theme of transparency here, right? And wanting to really embrace all voices, because I think why we're sitting here is because we represent the voices unheard, right? While we have also, many of us also put in a bid for these funds, right? But we're not voting on anything, right? However, should we be focusing on bringing in, like you said, I like that idea, one call, but we can help prepare the speakers that this is what we're going to be asking, and this is the nature, and have everybody on a call or in person, and for the existing list, or were we saying to disregard the list? I was unclear.
think the idea would be to refine the list to make sure those folks still have an ask for consideration, or did they meet their needs somewhere else?
I'm almost thinking, now that I've said all of that out loud, another thought popped into my head that I'm wondering if we, first pass anyway, almost ignore the dollar signs associated with any of the requests and really, really just focus on, like, confirm that we have a list of priorities, which I think we do, and then what organizations fall within those lists of priorities. That's a meeting in and of itself. Maybe we can do some background work in between meetings to help get that list complete. And then, once we see who falls into what bucket, then we can figure out what the next step might be, whether it's, do we invite people? Do we put that list to the council and say, here it is? I'm really wondering, like, where, I know that they have asked us to decide or give input about where this remaining funding should be spent. And maybe they'll come back to us and say, we would like you as a task force to provide that information and do additional work. But if maybe just providing them with those priority areas, and here's the organizations that work within those areas, and they can tell you what they need.
Can somebody finish taking the minutes? I have to go to Somersworth.
I think we're good. I think we're wrapped up.
Yeah, we're almost done, but just to finish up on that, Laurie, that I think we can certainly go back to this list and ask them to confirm their needs. And I think you're right. We don't need to get into the dollar numbers. We're basically just confirming the list of priorities, and if there are others that we need to add, then we could discuss those. So. Karen, how do you think we should, I certainly can follow up with this list, or I don't know if the city wants to take that on, or how should we?
I'm hesitant to take that on. I'm happy to be a resource to the task force.
Okay. So I can certainly reach out to them, and maybe we'll have to give some thought as to how we want to get them to confirm their needs, whether they, whether it's a phone call or.
What if you just let them know that
they can
it's in front of us
they
now?
Can come and do public comment.
Yeah.
So.
That could be
That's
a
a
whole
good
meeting
idea.
in and of itself, just
Yeah.
considering time management.
Yeah.
And can I also make a request that anybody who can't attend a meeting watches the recording before they come to the next meeting? Because that's going to save us a bunch of time.
Okay. Thank you. All right. With that said, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded.
Seconded by Lori,
Lori.
and it's 1:03.
Okay, thank you.